All right, we are on air. Thank you for joining. If you have watched episode 1, thank you, and thank you for joining for episode 2. On today's video, or podcast, wherever you're watching this, I want to cover some really important stuff, ADHD stuff, things I personally deal with, but also issues and challenges with ADHD I've seen come up most often in sessions. Just to give you a little background, for those who are watching for the first time, by the way, my name is Taha, and I am your host for Taha Harib's podcast. And, honestly, I haven't even started promoting this podcast yet. I don't know when I will. I just feel like for now, it's like a good personal journal, voice memo kind of a thing where the world doesn't know about it yet, but I'm also starting to try to get accustomed to it, at least try to get comfortable talking for an extended period of time, mostly because I've done shorter reels for Instagram and TikTok where it's like 60 seconds to a minute or two. So just being able to talk for this long is definitely something to get used to, but I am happy I could do this because I could provide so much more value and not feel like I have to just hook you guys in within the first 5 seconds and actually dive deeper into topics. So, for those who are listening for the first time, welcome to my podcast. I am a certified therapist, licensed therapist in New York, and I have had my master's in psychology and a second master's in mental health therapy. So, maybe I know a thing or two about mental health topics, psychology topics, and I just want to share that with you guys. Um, so, to give you a little background, I've had over 1,000 hours of sessions done, and some of the patterns or core themes that I want to mention that I've seen, besides anxiety and depression, because those are the two most common things that come up in sessions, or which is why people seek therapy, right? ADHD, super, super common. Very often, a lot of people come up and they seek therapy for ADHD, either because they don't want to go down that medication route because they feel like it might change them, it might change who they are, or they haven't felt that they have tried any strategies that has given them a way to overcome what's stopping them. Um, I'm gonna title this podcast and slash video as how to turn your ADHD into a superpower. And I say this because I have faced a lot of symptoms of ADHD. I can't say I have ADHD personally because I haven't gone and diagnosed. Um, but I feel like there's a lot of people who are on that same boat who feel like they do have ADHD, but just haven't taken either because of courage or just haven't found the time to go to a psychiatrist and getting actually diagnosed with ADHD or just getting a proper assessment done. Um, you know, they feel like they don't have any concrete solution. But what I feel has been most effective, aside from like taking Vyvanse or Adderall, stuff like that, is a lot of your lifestyle changes can actually have a dramatic effect. It can actually help you a lot if you approach your lifestyle in a way where you're keeping your ADHD symptoms in mind, right? The first thing is like being aware of what's going on. Like, are you even aware that you have ADHD? Are you aware of certain specific symptoms that come up pretty often? Those are important to know because if you don't really know what you're going through, you might label it as ADHD, but in actuality, it might be something completely different. So, I want to take a systematic approach because, as you know, people with ADHD could always go all over the place when it comes to any specific topic. And there's a lot I want to cover and personal insights that I want to give when it comes to ADHD. And how you can turn your ADHD into a superpower. Because believe it or not, there is actually a way to turn what you feel like is a hindrance or a disadvantage to you can actually be turned into something that can give you a slight edge over other people who don't have the symptoms of ADHD or just have that mindset of someone who thinks with an ADHD mind. So, how do you turn ADHD into a superpower, right? That's the first question. But before I dive into that, I want to uncover the basic scientific background of ADHD. Like, what is the DSM-5 criteria for ADHD? I'm going to go over this right now. I'm going to read it exactly as it is on the DSM-5. And the criterias are this, right? There's two sections that gets divided into. The first section is inattention symptoms. Basically self-explanatory, symptoms that stops you from being able to focus and pay attention. The second symptom list is hyperactivity, impulsivity symptoms. That's just being restlessness, fidgeting, things like that. And if you do have ADHD, you'll be able to relate to a lot of this. But to be properly diagnosed, you need to have at least 5 present from each of those lists, or either of those lists. So if you have 5 symptoms either from the inattention symptom list, then you qualify. And if you have 5 symptoms from the hyperactivity, impulsivity symptom list, then you might still qualify as well. Obviously, this is informal. This is not something that you should just, go around telling people that you have ADHD if you feel like you have 5 of these symptoms. But it gives you a good starting point. It kind of gives you a sign as to whether you should actually go to your psychologist, clinical psychologist, or psychiatrist and get actual assessment done. So this is no formal assessment, so take it with a grain of salt. All right, let's start with the inattention symptoms. A person must experience at least 5 or 6, in the case of children, of these symptoms for at least 6 months. Failing to give close attention to details or making careless mistakes, right? Failing to give close attention to details and making careless mistakes, that falls under that. All right, so next one, difficulty sustaining attention on tasks on or during play. Not seeming to listen when spoken to directly. 4th, failing to follow through on instructions, leading to incomplete tasks. Difficulty organizing tasks and activities. Avoiding, disliking, or being reluctant to engage in tasks requiring sustained mental effort. Losing things necessary for tasks or activities. Being easily distracted. Being forgetful in daily activities. All right, so that was the list of inattention symptoms. Kind of self-explanatory, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to be able to relate to. But here's the thing, it doesn't automatically mean you have ADHD just because, you relate to a lot of these symptoms, because a lot of them could be a result from your lifestyle. Could be just, the environment you grew up in, or, your current habits. So keep that in mind. Let's go to the second list of symptoms, the hyperactivity, impulsivity symptoms. And the same criteria, you need to have at least 5 and 6 in the case of children of these symptoms for at least 6 months. Fidgeting with hands or feet or squirming in seat. When you're restless sitting on a chair and you just either bouncing your leg or picking on your skin or doing anything that's kind of a repetitive motion or gesture that you would probably be able to tell if, you're doing something that falls under this category. Leaving their seat in situations where remaining seated is expected. Running about or climbing excessively when inappropriate. I feel like that one applies for children more. Climbing excessively when inappropriate. Difficulty playing or engaging in leisure activities quietly. Acting as if driven by a motor or being often on the go. You just always on the move. You wake up in the morning. I've seen people like this who wake up in the morning and just get up and start going. And I'm like, wow, how do you do that? I need to take up, make sure my blood's starting to circulate before I get up and start running around, because otherwise I'm just going to faint and fall down. Talking excessively. I guess podcast hosts don't count, because otherwise I'd definitely fit in this one. Talking excessively. Just keep in mind, I feel like that quality makes for a great therapist or a psychologist, because you do need to be talking a lot. Difficulty waiting their turn. I guess all of us think about your Disney trip who wanted to wait for that roller coaster, right? Interrupting or intruding on others, blurting out answers before questions are completed. Now, I want you to keep in mind a lot of these feel very common, but you have to do some self reflection to kind of come to understand, are you doing any of these symptoms beyond the ordinary level? Like, does it feel excessively, abnormally, too much, too often? And it does require some self reflection. That's why it's not something you should be, doing alone and just come to the conclusion of it. Yeah, pretty much those are the symptoms for the hyperactivity section. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of you guys were like, wait, I know I do this. I can put a tick box next to this. I can put a tick next to this. And yeah, a lot of these are very relatable, but that's the DSM-5 criteria for ADHD. If you feel like you want to go to your psychiatrist and get an assessment, please do. But here's the thing with ADHD. There's a reason I haven't gotten diagnosed for this long, even though I feel like I have or have some symptoms, is because I don't want to get into the trap of victimhood or defining myself through the lens of one specific mental condition. And I've seen this a lot with patients, and it's more of a hindrance than beneficial, because if you start seeing yourself through only the perspective that you have ADHD, in most case scenarios, you'll inadvertently, unconsciously start using ADHD as a blanket to excuse yourself from a lot of situations or justify your incapabilities because you have this fallback, this thing that you can call ADHD, and just say, yeah, I can't do that because I have ADHD, or I did this because I got ADHD. I didn't want to personally get into that trap, and hence I didn't get diagnosed. But I feel like if you are aware of that and then you proceed with seeking help from that perspective, it helps not boxing yourself into that, oh, I'm only an ADHD person, And over the time, here's what I've really realized, and I don't think I've heard this being told by many people. It's that time perception is the issue issue here, not attention span. I feel like attention has a major role in ADHD where you're unable to pay attention, but I think time perception is the main underlying issue here, because for several reasons. I think time has played a very common recurring theme in a lot of the symptoms. For example, forgetting to do your homework, right? Working under pressure, being unable to sit for an extended period of time in your chair, just being patient, right? A lot of these things have to do with time perception. And the biggest one is like the working under pressure thing. Like, you have to, like, for you to be able to complete a 5-page essay, at least I did this. I know a lot of other people did this too back in college. I waited until the last week or even the last day to complete like a 5-page essay, 10-page essay, because of the sheer pressure I got. And I couldn't understand the time perception of doing that task well before, maybe several days before, even maybe a few weeks before. It just didn't occur to me as something that needed my attention because of the time frame. So it kind of works hand in hand with attention and time, but time seems to be more of a major recurring theme here than attention, at least for me. There's several, not like, so we've gone through the symptoms of ADHD through the DSM-5's criteria, and a lot of these can be very theoretical, very rigid and objective, but a lot of symptoms that actually present in our day-to-day lives seem to be a little bit more blurry, less defined, and kind of all over the place. And it can show up in many ways, right? Some of the common ways I've seen is deciding on a career or a college major or what you want to study. It's kind of this all or nothing approach where you're unable to see the situation from, all right, I'm gonna do this first and then I can try out other things. It doesn't work that way for people who think with ADHD. It's like, oh, this is what I'm gonna be studying. I have to make sure this is 100% because I'm gonna put in everything I have for the rest of my life forever. So I have to be 100% sure that this is what I want to do. And it takes them down this paralysis analysis route where they're constantly trying to reiterate, try out new path, and figure out which one they want to commit the rest of their lives to. It's hard for them to think in spectrum. It's hard for them to think that there could be a space between the black and white where you're able to approach things from. When you're thinking in terms of extreme, you have to come with extreme certainty to make a decision, and hence you're unable to make a decision on anything very important to you. That's why less important tasks seem to be easier to decide on, not actually initiate action on, but even just to decide on, because it feels less significant, less impactful into your life. But when it comes to decisions like, your career and stuff, people tend to be all over the place. They don't want to box themselves into one box or be known as this one person. At least I know I didn't. And having to choose a niche is like the worst nightmare of anyone with ADHD, especially people who are trying to get into content creation. Like, I've had the biggest issue with trying to get into a niche, and I still don't think I want to choose a niche yet. Or ever. I kind of just want to talk about different stuff all over the place, and that's okay, right? Which leads me to the other thing. You have to accept who you are and how you're doing things. It's a different situation if you're in your 20s, and having to try out different things, experiment with different experiences, and just get a feel of different activities, right? You don't have to box yourself in your 20s. I encourage my clients in their 20s to spend time trying out different things, because that's what I did. And the tricky part is, when you get closer to your 30s, you need to learn how to say, okay, I've given a fair chance to everything and learned enough about myself to know what I might like for the next 5-10 years. Because if you approach it from that point of view, where it seems like you're not doing this forever, but rather giving yourself a time frame where there's a definitive end, even if you do end up loving what you're deciding to do and you want to do it more than 5-10 years, then it gives you that sense of peace, just knowing that, all right, there is an end date. If I don't like it, I can move on. And that's the other major theme. Like, think of things in terms of sequences rather than trying to approach multiple things at once. What I mean by this is, sequencing is telling yourself, I'm going to try this first, and then I'm going to try this, and then I'm going to try this. Instead of, all right, I want to try all these 3 things at once and see which one works. Because you're going to just end up half-assing each of those 3 things, not really fully understanding your potential in each of those 3 things, and ending up feeling like none of those 3 things work for you, and then feeling like nothing is really meant for you because you're just not able to give each one of them enough of a chance, right? So follow the rule of sequencing. The other thing that I found to be very, very helpful, as much of a cliche it could be, is that people who have ADHD, they constantly have this second voice going on in their head that contradicts the first voice, just to make sure they're able to look at everything from every angle possible, so they're not missing out on any specific information or factor taken into account. And so when these 2 voices go back and forth, that's probably when you get stuck in paralysis analysis, right? Because one contradicts the other, but the other comes with a great point, and then the first one then comes up with a better point, and then you just end up not going anywhere because you just have this constant battle in your head. Journal, write down your thoughts to make these thoughts concrete and actually somewhere where you could revert back to, look back into, to get some perspective on. if you don't write your thoughts down, like I spoke about the time perception, if it stays in your head, you're going to be thinking back and forth really fast, so fast that you won't be able to keep up and feel overwhelmed at the end of the thought process. But when you start writing, preferably, probably the only way is using a pen and paper instead of typing, because typing increases the speed of thoughts, which kind of defeats the purpose. So using a pen and pencil to actually write those paper and pen to write those thoughts down controls the pace of your thoughts, because there's only so fast that your hand can write. And so it controls the speed of your thought. Again, there's a time perception here, right? There's the theme of time recurring, controlling the speed of your thoughts. But not only that, is when you write these thoughts down, you know they're not going anywhere. They're not just in your head, going to be flying across here and there, maybe popping in and out of throughout the day. You know that it is somewhere very concrete that you could open a book and get back and dive into the same thought process because it's written down. And you can almost have a conversation with yourself with that one voice and second voice on paper. That is the whole point of journaling, and I don't think it's more important than anyone else than a person who has ADHD to sit down and write their thoughts down, especially when they're feeling overwhelmed or they have to make a decision of some sort. But going back to the initial aspect of not becoming a barrier to yourself when you do get the urges of trying out a few different things, you just need to structure it. You don't have to say, no, I can't do all these things because I may only have skills in one thing and not the other. But rather allow yourself, like give yourself the permission to try out crafting, photography, stock trading. But only so much that you could fit in to your schedule while not feeling overwhelmed. But there is no rule that says that you cannot try different things at once. Obviously sequencing works, but if you feel like you're unable to sequence and you have to be the person who has to try these 3-4 different things, approach it in a realistic manner, somewhat with an approach that that you can handle and not feel overwhelmed. But if you are able to sequence, I highly recommend trying to sequence and just trying to have this self-talk with yourself, just telling yourself that it's okay to approach one thing. I am going to get to plan B. I am going to go for activity 3, but let me first try activity 1. That's all. You're not telling yourself that you're not going to approach or ever try out activity 2 or 3. Now, the other framework that helps or has helped me before is the T-shaped skill stack. I wrote this on one of my articles before. Now, think of the letter T, and you see the horizontal line going across is general skills that you acquire, soft skills that you acquire that could be utilized in many different occupations, hobbies, activities. You spend the first 20s, first few years of your 20s or even all of your 20s to acquire those soft skills, that could be negotiating, that could be critical thinking, analysis, things that can be used in many different, jobs or positions and activities and hobbies. But once you feel comfortable, then you go for the vertical route, which is the line going down on that letter T. That's when you try to pick a master skill and really go in deep into that and try to put in thousands of hours to try to master that. The critical part is the initial part, going across with the horizontal line. Like, you need to give yourself permission to try out different things to acquire those skills, because if you don't, you end up being a master of one. And we know the saying, right? Jack of all trade, a master of none, but it's still better than a master of one. Now, it's a very conflicting saying, because the T-shaped kind of contradicts that in a whole new way by saying that you should eventually try to master one thing. But if there was a letter that had multiple lines going down, that would make more sense. But the point is, you want to be able to master one thing first before you approach the second thing to master. There is no rule saying that you can't master multiple things, but the point is, you have to be able to master one thing first. You could acquire your general soft skills overall by approaching and doing multiple different things, but that's the whole point of, spending your first 20s and trying to experiment and try out different things. But eventually try to master one thing. And going back to our original question, like, how do we turn ADHD into this superpower, this skill that actually gives us a edge up over other people. Now, a lot of things that we haven't, a lot of personality traits that we haven't touched on when it comes to ADHD. The pro side, there's hyperfixation. Even though these may seem that they're more of a con, but trust me, they're pros. Hyperfixation, state of flow. When you get into this state of flow, when you just forget where time is and you just into the task. Obsessive behavior, stubbornness, resiliency. Now, you may see a common theme there. Being able to indulge yourself into an act, into an activity, with all your attention, with all your time, even if it seems irrelevant, that actually gives you an upper hand. Because even though it feels like you're hyperfixating, it gives you an advantage because a lot of people are not able to go into the same level of depth that people with ADHD have. Now, what we choose to hyperfixate on is a whole nother story, because it would only make sense if we hyperfixate on something that is relevant to what we're trying to achieve and our end goal. But if you're able to target all that hyperfixation into something that will lead you to achieving your final goal, you are going to have a level of depth other people cannot get into. The attention to detail, getting to that state of flow, all of this will start happening naturally. And people who have ADHD know how obsessed they can get with a particular topic, and that's exactly the skills that you need, the personality trait you need to master one specific thing. If you're not obsessed, then you're not going to get into that same level of depth, nor will you have that same level of consistency. For people who have ADHD, if you've noticed, the times you've actually been consistent and resilient throughout any process is when you were actually hyperfixated about that particular topic. Now, it doesn't matter if that topic was, aliens or conspiracy theories. The fact is that you are able to do it and you are able to get into that mind space. It's just how do we redirect that attention into something that we are willing to do and that actually will contribute to our overall goal. The first thing is you have to proceed it with the mindset that if it's not something you can focus on for too long or proceed with action, you're probably not interested in it. There may be other superficial reasons that you're attempting to make that your goal, either money, popularity, fame, whatever it is. And that is not the thing for you. If you're unable to focus deeply on that topic or hyperfixate, it's something you probably don't care about, and that's okay. The action aspect of things. A lot of times people with ADHD, when I say we, feel like we're just stuck because we're overambitious and want to do so many different things, is because our mind is moving faster than the reality where we put in action towards those tasks. If we don't have any action backing up what we're trying to do, we're going to constantly feel like we're just analyzing, putting in no progress. And if you are in a place where you feel unsure about what you want to do with your life, or feel like you don't know which direction things need to go into, just put in the action of whatever that is. The first thing that comes into your mind, just take action towards it. Try to go for it as long as you can. If you don't like it, then you move on to the other thing. But while you're in this journey, in this process of putting in action into these different interests that you have, you will at least not feel paralyzed by your thoughts. Action is the main thing to make you feel like you can put in some work towards your ambition and you don't just have empty dreams. Because a lot of ADHD people have ambitions and they're just unable to act on it because they don't know where to begin. The fact of the matter is it doesn't even matter where to begin as long as you begin something, even if it's in the middle of the process of what it looks like. Whether the process from A to Z and you start at D and E, it doesn't matter. The point is you just have to get started. There are a few other symptoms that falls under the con section of having ADHD, and I'm sure there's not just a few. There's a lot of other stuff, right? Like your working memory gets affected. A lot of people don't talk about. Working memory is like maybe your parents or your spouse, someone just said, "Hey, can you just do this?" And you may have acknowledged it and you may have said okay to that statement, but a few minutes later, you're just struggling to think and figure out, wait, what was that they told me? What was that they said? And that's going to happen pretty often because that is a very recurring theme of ADHD. Hypersexuality and infidelity, a lesser spoken about symptom of ADHD. Stuff that also doesn't get mentioned in the DSM-5, and I get it, it's not according to the books, but if I'm seeing a recurring theme and a pattern, then it's definitely a part of ADHD manifesting itself. Unable to hold the same partner, right? Having to cheat, having to not, beyond just your romantic partner, having to feel like if your friend does something of the smallest scale, you don't feel like it's forgiving for them. You're unable to forgive them. You feel like they're just not the right person for you. You need to go find new friends. That's not the one. That all or nothing feeling will pop up in your social life and many other areas of your life, and it's something you should be aware of, because with awareness you're able to tackle it better and really invalidate the invalid thoughts that you get, because not everything that our brain tells us is real. Not every thought is accurate. The whole point of our brain is to protect us. It isn't to come up with rationales that actually are valid or practical reasonings or logic. It is to fundamentally protect us. That is his whole point. So there are a lot of cons, but with the theme of how you can turn your disadvantages of having ADHD is, like I mentioned earlier, it's that hyperfixation. You can use it to your advantage. You are able to go in a level of depth that most people aren't unable to go into, and it may seem odd because it's like, wait, I feel like that's pretty normal. Isn't that normal for everyone? But the reality, it isn't. A lot of people aren't able to do that, and maybe certain circumstances when you interact with others, you'll able to find that out. But that is uniquely an advantage to you, someone who has ADHD. And ultimately, I say, no matter what condition you have, find a humor in life. If you find the humor in life, if you're able to laugh at the face of something that may seem like an adversity or disadvantage or tragic to the rest of the world, you're able to get through processes a lot less worn out by what life has to throw at you. If you're able to laugh at the irony of life, it will make your life a lot easier. But yeah, I think I've spoken enough about ADHD and give you guys a shit ton of information here. But I hope you guys found that helpful and got some perspective on ADHD. There is like so much to talk about when it comes to ADHD, and there's only so much I could cover. But I tried to relate it to myself. Since I have first-hand experience, I do like talking to clients on therapy that are suffering. I wouldn't even call it suffering, or are just facing the challenges of ADHD, because I'm able to help them relate much better. But yeah, I think that's all I got for you guys today. I hope this episode was helpful. I hope you got something out of it. And let me know in the comments, or just email me any suggestions or topics that you guys want to hear me talk about, because there is so many different topics I could cover. Morning depression, anxiety, social anxiety is such a big one. Recently, EMDR has been popping up a lot for people who seek therapy and suffer from trauma, PTSD, and EMDR has come up as a very strong solution. That's something we could touch on in the future. But as far as today, ADHD is all I got. And until next time, guys, I'll see you on episode 3. Peace out.